All right, peeps, welcome to the Culture and People cast today. Joel, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am a recruitment marketing specialist, and I just started my own company. It's called Headhunter Media, and our goal is to really rebrand the agency recruiter and just change the story of what people think about recruiting as a whole. And so my goal is to help agency owners with their content strategy on LinkedIn primarily, but really just help them tell their story and get the good guys out instead of just hearing all the negative press that you get from recruiters. So
Yes. Oh
that's
my gosh.
me.
That's so great. And as a business owner who doesn't enjoy social media as much, I think people like you are very helpful. I would not be even as successful as I am, which I'm small potatoes on social media, but without my team, helping me out. So I think
100%.
there's definitely a value for a partner like you. So your work does influence people and culture within these organizations, right? So what's the
Yeah.
best thing about that work for you?
Yeah, I think for me, primarily the influence that I've found over the probably the last year and a half has actually come from social media. So
Yeah.
I probably approach it more from um, kind of just like an overall social media influence and just really how to use content in a strategic way to make an impact. And I think a lot of times when we think of social media in particular, it's a weird, it's almost a weird dichotomy of like putting yourself out there and elevating yourself and it being a very self, like me, this is
Yep.
me
Yep.
type thing. What I've found is it's really a great way to impact people and kind of put your own vulnerability out in the world and allow other people to be vulnerable, which I think right now, whether you're at a company or whether you're influencing people on social media, there's a lot of topics that are really sensitive right now. And so we actually need people in workplaces, particularly leaders, that are going to be able to go to those vulnerable places to open it up for others to have conversations around like mental health, DNI, all these really
Yeah.
huge issues. It all starts with actually having real conversations. So that's my goal. And on social media is let's have real conversations. Let's open up the door to some maybe topics that aren't just so cookie cutter. And I'm willing to do that by sharing my own story and just being out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that as a personal fan of vulnerability, I've been talking on that for years. Loved when Brene Brown started really promoting that too, because I got a lot of play. Vulnerability is the key to building trusting relationships because when we're holding back, that's really, it comes across as superficial and inauthentic. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that empowerment, when you finally see somebody click that I can do this authentically, right? I can do that
100%.
authentically online. So I'm curious from your perspective, because you work with a variety of organizations. I'm hearing from leaders that engaging talent is a challenge, maybe
Yeah.
always, but also right now. What are your thoughts?
I honestly, I think it comes back to almost that vulnerability piece. And I think right now, particularly with everything that's going on, vulnerability and it is huge because it puts everybody on a level playing field. And we're all going through issues with mental health and, you're dealing with families in a different way. And we're all coming into a season and we've been in a season of just like a new way of doing things. And I think when that happens, it's really important for people in leadership to be more vulnerable and say, hey, I'm dealing with the same issues you are. Like I'm dealing with where's my business going to be, and I don't know where what 2021 looks like. It's hard for me to plan these things, and I think the more leaders that can have those conversations and be transparent, the more they're going to have engaged people. Because I think again, with technology, we have the access to work 24/7, and so I think it's important for leaders to say, look, you need to check out right now, and to encourage people to check out. And I think the more you have those real conversations with your employees, the more that you're going to create that engaged employee, and particularly with I think Gen Z and millennials coming more into the workforce. Um, I think there's more of an emphasis on like not work being your whole life, but truly having that work-life balance. So I think that's where these conversations around vulnerability and just transparency, it helps really engage with people and get on their level. And now more than ever, you can't do that physically. So you've got to learn how to use technology to be able to actually uh, be vulnerable and have those conversations. So I think there's education and there's learning that needs to happen of how do we have an intimate conversation via Zoom, because we just don't have the face-to-face obviously as much anymore.
Yeah, agreed. And so thinking about vulnerability as, maybe the key to move culture and people operations forward, let's get really tactical for somebody. Maybe they're a people leader, maybe they're not. What can they do to really use that as a tool to advance the culture and people? Where can they start?
I think it starts through real conversations. So mental health, for example, is one of those topics that for years people have strayed away from and nobody wants to talk about it. And still now, there's a lot of fear around that subject because, it's a very vulnerable place and it uncovers hard things and they're hard topics. But I think as leaders, where you start is you start by going there and learning how to go there with people. And particularly right now, communication is key. Obviously, you want to stay communicating, but there's different levels of communication. So, not asking somebody how they are in a way of like, let's just get that out there because it's good small talk, but actually figuring out like, how are you? What's going on with your life? And being able to go there with people, it's just becoming more and more important. And I think if you're gonna want people to be engaged and you're gonna want people to give who they are, you can't you have to be able to do it, and you have to be able to accept them then for where they're at, and you've got to be able to go through the ups and downs and not just say, well, just show up and be positive because that's our culture. You've got to allow people to
please stop being Pollyanna, right? Like that.
Totally.
Being a leader does not mean you have it all figured out or that you're all happy or that you're all fulfilled at your job. Like, I think we need to be more honest about that. And I love what you said, like, just go there. Like it might be awkward. And we're probably talking to leaders who maybe didn't even have enough one-on-ones with their people beforehand. Exactly. And I've coached leaders who say like, well, isn't that going to be fake now that I'm scheduling weekly one-on-ones with them? Well, do you think it's valuable and do you really want to do it? Let's start with the root. If we can get you there, then even if it's awkward at first, you just own it. I wish I would have been doing this all before, but now I want to start doing it, right?
100%.
And saying things like that is displaying vulnerability.
And it's like we talked about before. It's like, what's your motive for it?
Yeah.
Like if your motive is like you actually have empathy and you care about your people, then you want to meet with them and they're going to feel that. If you just read a book that said, hey, you've got to meet with your people one-on-one because that's going to increase the profitability of your business, people will feel that too. So I think,
yeah. And if that's you, by the way, you should step out of leadership. Really. Yeah. If you can't get to the point where you think meeting with your people regularly is important, then you should not be a people leader. You should go be a specialist, right?
And I would question the fact of whether or not you are even a leader within that. And obviously, empathy is huge and it's becoming more relevant. And I think there's a lot of great leaders out there that are talking more about empathy and how to really connect with people on that level. But like you said, it's when you get real with people, it's always going to be really awkward at first. Sure. But the more you get used to that awkwardness or that uncomfortability, the more you grow in it as well. And you have to break past that if you really want real connection with people. Yeah. Otherwise, how else can you really get engaged people? I don't see another way.
My favorite way to ask for feedback from my team and my clients, but specifically my team, I've been using it for, a decade, is at the end of every one-on-one, I always saved enough time because it can't be 30 seconds because then it doesn't look serious like you want this. But I would say, what could I be doing better or differently to support you?
Yeah,
and they would go, oh, nothing. And you're like, I'm going to ask this every time we meet. And so I'm waiting for you to finally tell me something, right?
I love that.
It could be, and now my team knows, like, you could be more timely when you told me 2 days and it's typically 3. So I really need you to be more timely then. Great. I'm going to work on that. I can't overpromise that I'm perfect, but I'm going to work on that. Right. So even by asking for feedback and then acting on it in a really, I think, consistent way, right, is really important. So Joel, we have just another 30 seconds. Is there a leader that you would want to shout out that's doing great work in the ring?
I would say Claude Silva. So she's a chief heart officer at VaynerMedia. I think she's a perfect example of everything we're talking about. Like she's really vulnerable in videos. All of her content is really vulnerable. But then when you see her on podcasts, you see her on different things, she's just really in tune with how to care for people. And obviously their organization is, I mean, they're doing amazing things and they're growing a lot. So I think she's a great example. So
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for the recommendation. And thank you for all you're doing for people and culture in your work.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really
All right,
appreciate
peace.
it.
Yeah,
Bye.
peace.